The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and you are now on Navigating TPE on a Budget, the webinar. So we want to introduce who our facilitators and presenters are today. So I am Catherine Kelman. I go by she, her, hers, and I'm the Associate Director at Florida Atlantic University. And I'm one of the presenters today. And my experience within TPE is I've been a coach. I volunteered as a coach in a couple last 2 years, and then I've been at the employer side of the table as well as a candidate, and has gone as a group or and as an individual each time.
And my name is Derek. I'm one of the other presenters. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm currently an area coordinator at the University of Dayton. And I was most recently a candidate at TPE last year in Philadelphia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ebony Lamar. I currently serve as the chair of the candidate development team for the Placement Exchange. My prior roles with TPE, I was a volunteer in a variety of capacities. I also have served as a candidate twice, and I've been an employer at TPE multiple times. I'm here to assist Derek and Catherine with any questions y'all may have in relation to the Placement Exchange experience in general. Before we move on, I want to direct everyone's attention to the bottom of your screen. There you will see your question box with that, and so there's your opportunity to input all the questions that you have throughout our presentation today. We'll make sure that we get as many questions as we can towards the end of the presentation. If we cannot get to your question, you're always welcome to pose that question through our email at candidates@theplacementexchange.org. Also want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. And so if you go to YouTube and type in the Placement Exchange, you'll see this recorded webinar in about 1 to 2 days. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kirsten Fox. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the director of the Placement Exchange and work on behalf of both NASPA and ACUHO-I to present TPE to our candidates and employers. I am here just to welcome you today. We're glad that you were able to join us for the webinar, as well as for the Placement Exchange experience as a candidate. We work on behalf of our partners, in addition to NASPA and ACUHO-I, NACA, NODA, ASCA, and AFA, as well as higher ed jobs. So I want to thank you on behalf of each of them also. I have a student affairs background, first going through placement before placement was TPE back in the early 2000s. And then after that have served as an employer at a variety of institutions in a variety of roles. So I understand both the candidate and employer side, and definitely understand the concern about how do you experience the job search process as a candidate while staying on a budget. So I look forward to turning it back over to our presenters and want to thank them today for putting this on for everyone. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so this is just a brief overview of sort of the content that we're going to go over in the next 30 minutes or so. And how we're going to look at this today, we're going to start with some outcomes. This is higher education student affairs, and so we want to touch on some of the things we hope that you all get out of it. And then we're going to sort of take you on a journey today of before TPE happens, what some of that behind the scenes ahead of time planning what it should look like. And then once you get to LA, what is that going to look like? What are some expenses that might pop up there? And then TPE is over. If you decide to stay for NASPA, when you begin to get those on-campus interviews, what that process is going to look like as well. And so we're sort of just going to take you on this timeline of a journey through what the sort of next few months might look like for you as a candidate going through the Placement Exchange.
And then there's always learning outcomes. So our hope today is that you'll touch upon the 3 learning outcomes that we have. So identifying financial resources available to candidates prior to TPE, during, and post, establishing differences between attending in a single party or within a group of individuals, and then developing strategies to plan for your TPE experience and the overall interview experience. So we want to highlight a couple of things first before we start at the meat of our presentation. So first, here are some important dates, but as you think about your budget, the very first important thing to think about is that January 11th date. And as you're creating your budget, you want to pick the early bird registration because you're going to save a lot of money. As you look at the bottom corner of the slide, you'll see that there's a difference in the cost for the early bird versus the regular, and then even the late. And as you think about what your cost will be throughout your interview season, it is always to your advantage to do early bird, not just for your pocket, but also getting a head start on getting your information out to employers and getting interviews actually scheduled. So that is our biggest tip, is thinking about that and looking at those dates as you start to plan your calendar.
So with TPE, we know that there's a number of expenses that are going to come along with that. And so in order to offset some of those costs, we first want to think about looking at department funding. We know that some folks in the departments that you work in, there might be some professional development funding you might be able to use. There might be some other ways that you can get money to help offset some of those costs for your travel and your time at TPE. But that's not everyone has access to that. And so with scholarships, there's scholarships that may be offered through your higher education department if you're a grad student, or at the university that you work at, and through different educational programs. And so do the research and figure out which scholarships are available that you would be able to use, and put in that front work, put in that work now, because we know that scholarships, there's applications and it takes time. And so begin to put in that work now, so that way you have that payoff in the back end. If you have family and friends, you have birthdays coming up, holidays, what a great opportunity to ask someone for a gift card. If Starbucks is really important for you, then potentially ask for a Starbucks gift card or a donation to help you be able to get to TPE in lieu of a gift that you might often receive. We know that grad school budgets are tight, entry-level professional budgets are tight, but putting away $25 or $50 a paycheck can go a long way between now and March, when that TPE time comes up. And those little amounts can add up to a lot of money. In 4 months, if you only put $50 away each month, that's already $200 that you've saved during that time. And then finally, we think it's really important, and we're going to hit home on this a lot today, is to develop a budget and stick to it. And so we put together a quick budget. We know that if folks are coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, there's going to be an airfare charge, ground transportation, getting from LAX to your hotel, to your Airbnb, whatever your accommodations may be. There may be some costs there. Your hotel or Airbnb or whatever those accommodations where you're going to stay at look like, your meals, if you need new clothes, how much you might want to spend on that. And so we put together a quick brief budget that you see there in the corner of about $1,750. And we know that can be a lot, and that's why we're going to spend the next bit of our time breaking down that budget to talk about some saving strategies in each of the different areas. So that way you can be as fiscally responsible during your time in LA as possible and not spend too much money.
So So first, let's talk about the essential items. So you have to clothes. So everyone's going to be packing. So let's talk about what are the important things to make you feel good about packing. So do you want to have large sizes? So you start to think about those things. That's a great Christmas gift or holiday gift that you may be thinking about, are those toiletries. Next is the suit or professional clothing. And so for me, as I thought about my TPA experience, I often went and purchased a brand new suit, but I was really cost effective on where I would go. And so I didn't go to a department store. I went to a discounted location and got a discounted suit and got those items at a cost that was within my budget. But a good tip about that is make sure you wear your suit first before you bring it to TPE, so you feel comfortable and have that ability to kind of move and feel comfortable in that space. Because for a lot of us as student affairs professionals, we don't wear a full-on suit all day long, and so you want to make sure you still feel comfortable in that space, and that you're bringing your authentic self to the clothing choice that you bring. Additional to that is a bag. So for me, an accessory is really important. And so think about what you want to carry your important information while you're at TPE. So for some people, a messenger bag is going to be what they want, or a book bag, or maybe just a laptop carry case that they have their information, like resumes or your memo pad or just a portfolio. But think about those things. If you need to purchase a new one, like Derek said in the previous slide, that might be something that someone can gift you. Or if you already have that item, make sure you start to work with it throughout the day and walk around, so you make sure that that's a comfortable bag, because you're going to spend a lot of time carrying a lot of things in the bag that you carry. The next is a Tide-to-Go pen and mints and granola and snacks. And so I want to highlight the candidate working area that's always provided at TPE for candidates, because often we forget those things about making a mess, and you want to make sure you're at your best. So a Tide-to-Go pen for yourself is great, but if you forget it, they'll always have something there. Next is you're going to talk a lot. So having mints or your favorite gum, have those items so you can have fresh beverage. You're talking and engaging with an employer. But if you forget, they always have great mints in the working area. And then think about feeding yourself and staying nutritious, but also staying hydrated in that moment. So granola or snacks, and building that time in your schedule. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a later slide for those snacks. So having a granola or gummy bears or something to have in between interviews or just throughout the day to keep yourself your energy up and ready to go for the next conversation. The next is thank you cards. So there's always this big debate on, should I buy actual thank you cards or should I not? It's really an individual choice, but think about your budget. Never will someone ask you to pay an enormous price for a thank you card, because a lot of employers don't always keep every thank you card they get. They may keep some or none, because they also have to pay for getting stuff shipped there. So think about that first, and if it's really important to the institution that they're sustainable, then you may not want to use a thank you card. But that's a personal choice. And then we've always taken the note that a lot of local areas have thank you cards, especially dollar stores. And so think about that within your budget. Business cards, another great debate in the world of placement exchange and job searching. So some institutions do provide staff with business cards of their own, and some do not. It is really your personal choice if you want to use your current institution's business cards or purchase your own. But really make it sure that you're taking some time to make sure that all your information is correct, and that it really does give a snapshot of who you are and your brand. And then last, the water bottle. You want to stay hydrated. There's a lot of talking that happens at TPE, and so make sure you bring a reusable one, because we want to stay sustainable, but also that's another cost you don't have to purchase is water. So think about that as you're thinking about your essential items.
So traveling to TPE is, besides the hotel, probably one of the biggest expenses that folks are going to have if you're not from that LA metropolitan area. And so a couple ways to think about saving money when you are traveling with airfare. So first off, the arrival airport is going to be LAX. If you have a little bit more time, you could look at some other airports in California and think about driving or meeting up with someone that is maybe driving from another location. But the majority of folks flying are going to fly into LAX. But what you can do is decide on a departure airport. And so there's a lot of airports on the East Coast, in the Midwest, things like that. And so look at different areas. For example, I live in Dayton right now, and Cincinnati, Columbus, Detroit are all within 3 hours of Dayton. And so looking at different departure airports might help reduce that cost. And so do your research. And the next thing that goes along with that is putting on price notifications. Use Google Flights, use Skyscanner, use the different resources available to you that are going to tell you when that price drops, so you can book that flight as soon as the price drops. Looking at different airlines, every airline has different perks and different things that come along with that. And baggage fees, if you are going to have to send a bag because you have your suit and things like that, and you need to check that bag, baggage fees can start to add up. And so maybe looking at a Southwest Airlines, if they service your area where bags are free, might be a better option for you. Some airlines, if you have a layover, 1 or 2 at different airports, will help reduce costs there as well. And so looking at what your different options are. And then if you have an airline that you use with frequent flyer miles, or a family member or a friend, and they'd be willing to gift those frequent flyer miles to you, that might be a way to reduce costs as well. Or if you have those frequent flyer miles, then this is a great time to use it to reduce costs. And then finally, look at different flight times, especially for folks that are on the East Coast. Some of those red-eye flights back and forth across the country might be a little bit cheaper than that daytime flight. And so, like I said, put on those price notifications with the different apps and resources that you have, and book it when the time comes. And what's important to remember is that the placement exchange is in March. We know for folks that live in colder climates that snow could be a factor in your travel as well. And so keep that in mind. If it's important for you to buy insurance for your flight to ensure that you get where you need to go, that's going to be an additional cost. And so factoring all those things into your budget are going to help you be able to pinpoint a flight that's going to get you to LA in the best way possible, but also provide you the reassurance that you are going to make it there on time.
If I can add for one add a piece to the flights, was that as someone from California, was that Burbank Airport and Long Beach Airport will significantly drop your costs in your plane ticket, usually by $200 if you're willing to go into Long Beach or Burbank Airport. So just something to note with that if you're looking at more to decrease your cost.
Definitely. So once you make it to LA, your next step is figuring out how are you going to make it from the airport to wherever your accommodations are. And there's a number of different options. And this is where we start to see that differentiation between individual and group. And so we want to bring that into play here as well. And so the first thing is to do your research now on what mode of transportation is going to work the best for you. Uber and Lyft, you can go in now and put where you want to go and see what the cost is. So that way you have a heads up ahead of time for what that cost is going to be. Taxis are also available at LAX and other nearby airports to travel to downtown. But there might be an additional cost with that. And so it might be more effective to use an Uber or Lyft, but doing that price comparison is going to help you. If you have time, then public transportation is going to be one of your cheapest options for travel. I did this last year in Philadelphia. It only cost me $7 to go from the airport to downtown Philly, but it took me about an hour and a half. And so I planned for that ahead of time. And so if you can plan for that ahead of time and don't mind taking your luggage on a bus or a train, then that might be a cost-effective option for you. But we recognize that time is money, and for some people that might not be the best option. And then if your hotel or wherever you're staying offers free transportation or low-cost transportation, that is definitely an option to use as well. And we also recognize that not everyone's going to be flying, not everyone's going to arrive at LAX. So if you are driving to the conference, think about the cost of that travel and traffic, as well as if you're going to park at the hotel, there might be some costs associated with that. And so make sure you reach out to the hotel or Airbnb, wherever you're staying at ahead of time, to figure out what costs might be associated with parking. And then with an individual versus a group, if you're in a group, travel on some of these options like an Uber or a taxi, you might be able to split those costs a little bit more. And so talking with some folks ahead of time and being able to use Venmo or Cash App, something like that, to be able to reimburse each other if you can't split those costs ahead of time. But if you are an individual that's traveling, Uber Pool exists. And so that's where the Uber driver will pick up you and then a couple other people on the way and drop you all off at wherever you're going. You might be able to share a taxi with someone. Maybe you're on a flight and you know someone else is going to the same place. You could reach out to that person. But we definitely just recommend planning this early, because this is one of those costs that we don't think about. And if you wait till the last minute, it can cost upwards of $50, $60 to get you from the airport to the hotel. And that can begin to weed away at that budget and that planning that you did ahead of time.
Next is related to accommodations. It's important where you stay. So first, we have that battle of, do you want to stay at a conference hotel or an Airbnb or a hostel, or just maybe a local accommodations because you have family that's local? Make the decision based on your budget, but also, like Derek just said, time is money. So if you stay closer to the conferencing center, that may cost you more. If you stay further out, that may cost you more time to get there in the morning or throughout the day. And it may also think about the continuous traveling back and forth from wherever you're staying throughout the day. The biggest bonus is looking at spaces that do provide breakfast, because that's the one meal that's really important to every candidate. So if you do have a hotel that does provide breakfast, taking that option and really partaking in the breakfast items that you have. Wi-Fi, everyone wants to send an email or just a thank you card, or just engage on the TPE website to plan your interviews for the next day or during the daytime. So some hotels will provide Wi-Fi and some do not. And so think about that within your cost. If you can afford to pay for Wi-Fi throughout the day, at a hotel, that's fine. But if you can't, then you're going to have to think about that. And note that always at the conferencing center that TPE is in, there is Wi-Fi available for every candidate. But that may not be something that you want to spend your whole day at TPE waiting just because you have Wi-Fi. So think about that. And then check in and check out times. So that's related to a lot of your flying out. And I always call it the last day of TPE is the parade of suitcases. So luggage storage. Some hotels and some Airbnbs may say it's okay to keep your luggage there until you check out, but it may have an additional cost. And so if they don't allow that, or you don't want to take on that additional cost, you can always just bring your suitcase or your luggage to the candidate work area, and we're happy to watch it for you. But think about that as you're thinking about your day and your accommodations. So then when we think and we break it down into individual and group, the first for group is planning meetings. The one thing you don't want to do is figure out who's paying for what, whose card is going to be on the hotel or the Airbnb or wherever you're staying 2 days before you have to go to TPE. You want to plan ahead and have those very frank conversations and transparent about what's going on with your particular finances so that you can cover and make sure. You don't want to say you can cover incidentals when you really can't. And so making sure you're aware. The other biggest piece is when you're sharing a space, it's great to think about an Airbnb or a hotel and sharing it with 6 people. But remember, these are long days, and a lot of these other individuals are job searching just like you, and you want some downtime too. So think about the amount of people who you're sharing space with. And then as an individual, space is important. I want to give a big highlight to the last bullet, which is room sync. So for some people, you want to not share your room, that's fine. You can take on that individual cost. But you may be an individual who is seeking someone who is also going through this process, maybe alone, to share a room with. And so around the December time, you'll see some more information come on the TPE website about room sync to connect individuals who are coming individually with other individuals to see if they would like to room together and split that cost. Remember self-care in this process. So even though you're walking it alone, there's always someone to talk to, and you don't have to go back to your room by yourself. You can spend some time in the TPE area and talk with other candidates and maybe employers or mentors throughout the day so you can review and talk through your day. So now you get to TPE. It's day one. Day one means thinking about your budget. Stay on budget. You plan for a reason. So if you've only planned for 3 Starbucks breaks a day and you've now taken 6 on day one, your budget is now blown. And so think about that. And so the best tip I gave one of my grads last year was you love Starbucks, so ask for a gift card, and that's all the money you have for Starbucks during that time. But often during TPE, they may have breaks for coffee breaks or snack breaks or any of those things. So see if those things are happening, please take part in them because that's a great networking experience, but also an opportunity to stay on budget. Use your time wisely. You're going to be there for a couple of days and you're going to have interviews, but you may have some downtime. So you are going to be doing resume, sending out communications, reviewing job postings, but you'll also have the ability to go to a coaching session, meet up with a mentor, talk with TPE personnel because they have great wisdom. And so this is an opportunity to get some professional development even while you're trying to job search. For me, if I had only one interview that day, I stayed a whole 8 hours because I was able to engage with other people and volunteer. And I got a lot out of volunteering, more than probably any part of my experience. And then use your TPE website for local information. There's always going to be updates on social media and their website related to maybe events that are happening, maybe if they have discounts or just things going on that is important to the process, updates related to the schedule, so that way you know what's going on. And then comfortable shoes. You do a lot of walking at TPE. No one tells you that, but you do. It feels like you're walking a football field 3 and 4 times over each day. And so for me, I bought really comfortable office type shoes for TPE process that I knew that I would break in before the process, but then I also kept a good pair of sneakers. And throughout the day, I would wear my sneakers so my feet would be comfortable, but I also would have my feet ready for that interview to strut to get to my interview. So just keep that in mind. That's an additional cost, but make sure you have those. And then technology. We all love it, but do you need to bring every electronic item with you to TPE? I don't think you do. So think about those things because those things will weigh you down, but also you don't need to buy a brand new computer or a tablet for this experience. If you have one, use it. If you get one from your department, bring it. And if you forget your charger, I guarantee someone has a charger there that they'll happily lend it to you. So just think about those things as you think about your day. And always make sure you have a phone bank, because your cell phone is your biggest tool. And then ground transportation. Think about how many times you're going back and forth from your hotel or your Airbnb, or just going to get food. So really budget yourself to use either walking if things are in walking distance, or have things delivered to you. DoorDash and Uber Eats are great opportunities. Or if you're in a group, sending one person out to get everybody's order. But think ahead, order over the phone or over online, and just picking it up, because everybody might have the same thought to go to the same place. So resume paper, you don't need it. So I've always seen candidates bring the biggest stacks of resume paper, but you don't need them. If you want to make a couple copies of your resume on resume paper for that special university that you're hoping to get that job for, sure, that's not a problem. But what I would say is that TPE does offer great computer uses and printers that you can use to print off your resume, or just send out correspondence. And so you don't need to weigh yourself down with resume paper or printing things at a local printing space. Planning out your meals and snacks. So when I talked about essential items, think about that. You need to eat, you need to rehydrate, and you need to take some time for yourself to unwind and center yourself back to the next set of interviews. So make sure you plan in a meal. And my biggest hint is, not everybody needs to take lunch at noon to 1. As a candidate, I took lunch either 11 to 12 or 1 to 2, because I knew so many people would be out from 12 to 1. I used that time for some of my interviews who didn't, because they may have had multiple tables, and I would have snacks throughout the time. So really think about that and what you need and what's your best for you. If 12 to 1 works for you, then works for you. And then think about free and low cost food options. I do a lot of research related to where I'm going for TPE that given year, and look about where are the low cost food options. Are there things going on? At Philadelphia, we had the flower show, and every day I would walk through the convention center, and they were giving out free granola bars, and I took at least 2 every day, because that was something that I didn't have to pay for. So think about those things. And then you have socials at TPE. Your state might have a social, you may be part of an organization and they're having a social. Attend those, not just because you get to network, but think about the opportunity to get free food and engage with people, and that saves your budget. And think ahead. If you get invited to a social for a future employer, this isn't the opportunity to get a full 4-course meal. Eat before you get there, and then you get to snack. Your real focus is interviewing and engaging with that employer and all the people there. And then social activities. Go and do something fun, but keep it on budget.
So once you make it through TPE, through the few days that you're there for that, then your next step, you have a few different options. And so we want to talk about if you're staying for NASPA. So if you're staying for NASPA, you know there's going to be some additional costs that are going to come up. But the first thing to remember is that there's a discount for TPE candidates that are wanting to stay for NASPA, and that will help reduce the cost. And NASPA costs for graduate students are significantly lower as well. And so taking advantage, if you've never been to a professional conference or a national conference before, what a great opportunity. You're already in LA to be able to continue that networking and continue to meet some of the folks that you may have interviewed with, or folks from your home institution or where you did your undergraduate, those sorts of things. Another thing to think about is changing your hotel, or are you going to stay in the same place? And so maybe you wanted to stay in a hotel that was close to the convention center during TPE because you didn't want that added stress and those added costs of traveling. But now that you're staying for NASPA, there's a little bit more opportunity. Maybe you could stay a little bit farther away and travel in groups of folks to be able to come back. And so depending on where you want to stay in those costs, that might be a great opportunity. There also could be additional meal costs that come up with your time there. And so think about meeting maybe with someone who's an alum of your graduate program or of your undergraduate institution, maybe a past supervisor or mentor that might offer to be able to pay for one of your meals. And this could even work out during TPE as well, because a lot of folks are going to start arriving to LA while TPE is still going on. And so those last couple of days, potentially meeting up with someone who could provide that meal and also provide you that timed event is a great opportunity. As Kat said, if you're going to do sightseeing, do the free stuff first. LA has so many great opportunities to see things that don't cost a penny. And so do those before you start spending a bunch of money on going to see different things. And then continuing on with snacks and meals, you could tell Kat and I really love to eat. And so we think about this a lot. And so while you're at NASPA, go to different banquets, go to receptions that are available for your region, your state, your institutions, different things like that, and also look at the regions that you live in. When I lived in Region 3, they did a Vice President of Student Affairs breakfast for graduate students. And so that was the day I didn't have to worry about breakfast. And so look at those ahead of time, might be able to go to help reduce some of those costs.
So now you got that on-campus interview, hooray! But now the other budget begins. And so start to think about the following things. So first is reimbursement versus paid for prior to travel. So some institutions will say you have to pay for your interview travel prior and we may reimburse you. And some will say they'll reimburse you if you get the job. Some will say they will reimburse you if you don't get the job, or they will not reimburse you at all. It is your own cost. So think about that as you start to plan your budget, if you can take on that cost. But always think about being transparent. I was very transparent with one of the employers and said, I really would love to interview with you, but at this time, I don't have the funds to do so. And they were able to help and support me as a candidate and was able to pay. Now, please do not go and tell every employer that you can't pay, because then you get the word is out that you're trying to get everyone to pay for your travel. But if that institution really wants to have you come in, they'll work with you. And sometimes they won't, but just think about that as you think about your budget. Then food while traveling. Often an on-campus interview will include some meals, but not every meal. And so once you've looked at a basic schedule, and often you can find that online, or talk to the current institution you work for, and just think about you're often going to get at least dinner or lunch and a breakfast. So that traveling in, you may have to buy your own lunch or dinner that night. So put that on your budget so that you have that. And then beverages. Once again, having that reusable water bottle is a great tool, because then when you're at the airport, you don't have to go to you can use a water fountain, or keep your costs down. And then cards for the hotel, incidental. So thinking about what your credit cards or debit cards look like as you are in the interview process, because you may be staying at many hotels throughout your stay. And some institutions do put candidates up in student rooms. However, not all do. And some do request that, and for the hotel, you put your own credit card for incidentals. Next is time off. For our grad students, thinking about your class schedule. So if you're not working for 3 days straight, how are you managing your time so that way your check, it may not be affected, but if it is, then thinking about that. As well as your classes and all your homework. For those who are entry-level professionals and do get time off, may not be a concern, but just think about those things. And then the continuing of your on-campus interview process. You may not be able to take a full week off because you're having a lot going on, either with your classes or with work. So really thinking about that. The biggest thing is moving expenses. So planning out how much it would cost for you to move to your favorite institution in the school that you really want to find that job, and budgeting that on your budget, because you never know that tape and boxes and Tupperware containers would cost so much, but it does put people in business. So think about that. And then your job start date. Often, a lot of us, for our cycle for the year for hiring, we have people closing up their contract in maybe June, but they may not start until beginning August or late July. And so making sure that you financially have the means to continue to pay your bills and keep yourself fiscally responsible for your own situation before you start your start date. And then thinking and asking your new employer, when is their pay cycle? Do they get paid bi-weekly, or do they get paid monthly? And that may be different for other people. And then continue your job search. We don't always get that first job, but we really hope we will. But if you continue the job search, continue to look at your budget and reevaluate.
So thank you all so much for sort of listening to our perspective. You can connect with us on social media, as well as TPE on social media. We also have the email if you had additional questions, but now we just sort of wanted to open up the floor a little bit if any folks had questions, and we would be happy to answer some of those.
So I would, as we wait for some questions to come up, I would think about, for those who are graduate level staff on the line, think about, have you had a conversation with the other grads that may be graduating or across different professional social media accounts and also get some of their insight, but also think about having a general meeting related to the cost and budgeting, because some people have never had this opportunity. And I was a first-gen student, so I did this very much alone my first go-round, and I was completely lost. And I was at an institution who didn't have a lot of resources, and so I had to do a lot of networking to figure out what I needed to get together. But being able to see in the last couple of years that many of the other institutions I've worked for is a large group of graduate students getting together and having a planning meeting. And even though not all of them decided to plan as a group, it was great to have a meeting of the minds and talk through some of the things that they had apprehensions about related to the budgeting or just thinking about the planning thereof of the process. And so really using that vehicle to have that dialogue with others who are having this process happen is really important. It is a nervous experience, but it's really, really fun. I've enjoyed all of my times that I've attended TPE in all the different states, and I've really taken the opportunity to engage myself with those who work for the placement exchange and volunteer, but also all of candidates and employers. And it's like a little family reunion every year, because you kind of see where people have who were candidates who are now sitting on the employer side and vice versa. You really get to see people really grow in the process. And my biggest other tip, which has nothing to do with budget, is volunteer. It really does help. Both me and Derek are volunteering to do this webinar today, and we got a lot out of it because we were able to, reflect on what we've done, but also how much TPE has given back to us to help others in this process.
Yeah, definitely. And like we said throughout, just do your best to stay on budget and know that there's going to be some expenses and some things that you don't think about ahead of time. So make sure you incorporate that into your budget as well, maybe $50 or something like that. So that way, if you do go a little bit over budget on a food item, or you're like, I really do need this Starbucks today, or I need to go to Panera to get a bagel to start my day. Sometimes those things pop up. So make sure you have a budget for that. But do your best to get everything paid for ahead of time and really stick to what your plan is. So that way you aren't spending a ton of money while you're there that you hadn't already planned for ahead of time.
Just really quickly, I wanted to add, I think this has all been really useful information. When you're thinking about places that may have funds, I know Kat particularly talked about this earlier, but even though your graduate students, if some of your universities might have career centers that have some professional development and travel grants, I often think they spend most of their time promoting to undergraduates, but some still potentially have funding available for graduate students. They just don't always know that those are available to them. Many schools don't necessarily have those funds, so I don't want to give you any false hope, but there are sometimes kind of hidden pots of money on your campus, particularly around kind of travel for conferences or job interviews from career centers. So you should definitely at least ask.
I would say additional, as we wait for some more questions, is once you do have a budget, I would talk with your supervisor and have them review the budget. Not that you need to, but it gives them another set of eyes, but also often employers have seen the pitfalls of candidates prior and their lack of planning, and maybe thinking that, oh, I only need $50 for lunch every day, which is quite a lot of money. So thinking about do you need to spend $50 on lunch, or could that money be spent elsewhere? And then thinking about your overall budget for on-campus interviews, I would say is one of the most important things, because you don't really think about traveling and what you need to get a job. So thinking about the time it takes. And I was talking when me and Derek were planning our presentation, we talked about even traveling to and from. And so I really negotiated a lot of my travel once I got an on-campus interview, and made sure that I was able to sometimes bounce from one interview location to the next and never come back home. So that way I had the ability to save funds on the my airfare back and forth from each flight. All employers know that we're in the middle of interview season, so they're not going to fault you that you didn't go back to the home address that you have on your airplane flight if they're paying. And if they're not, it doesn't really matter, but think about that as well, because like we continue to say, time is money.
And it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in right now, but again, feel free to connect with Kat and I via email or via social media, as well as the Placement Exchange has a variety of ways to get in touch with them as well on social media and at their email. And so definitely feel free to reach out if you have questions that you didn't want to ask on the webinar.
So we just wanted to highlight some things coming up related to the placement exchange. So we have candidate orientation, and then we have a couple other webinars and opportunities to engage related to everything the placement exchange. And so really take the opportunity to mark your calendars and engage with us in many different ways. It won't be me and Derek again, but there'll be other great professionals and colleagues that will come and talk a little bit about the different topics that are listed here today.
And then, yeah, go ahead, Ebony.
And finally, if you haven't registered yet, make sure you get that early bird rate for registration, which is January 11th. But then, so we really hope you all join us on site. Take advantage of all the wonderful resources we have for our candidates to land that job.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Yep. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.